I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life. Most of those times, somebody at the table didn't believe me. That's fine. I get it. If somebody told me this story before I'd lived it, I probably wouldn't believe it either. But I was there. I saw it with my own 2 eyes, from about 40 meters away, lying flat on a cold roof with my heart going like a drum. And I'm telling you, I have never seen anything like it before or since. So let me start at the beginning. The real beginning, not the dramatic part, the boring part, because that's where it starts. My name's not important for this. People who were there know who I am. Back then I was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. Infantry. I'd been in long enough to think I knew what hard men looked like. I want you to understand that before anything else. I wasn't some kid fresh out of boot. I'd done 2 deployments already. I'd seen guys who could carry another man and his gear up a hill in full heat without slowing down. I'd seen guys stay awake for 3 days straight and still hit center mass. I thought I'd already met the toughest people on Earth. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. This was years ago now. The country doesn't matter much. It was somewhere dry. Mountains in the distance, the kind that turn purple at sunset and then go pure black like somebody cut a hole in the sky. Dust everywhere. The kind of dust that gets into your teeth, into your sweat, into your dreams. You'd blow your nose and it'd come out the color of the ground. The base was small. A coalition outpost, way out past anything you'd call a town. A few buildings, some HESCOS, a watchtower, a comms array, and a runway that was honestly more of a suggestion than a runway. We shared it. Americans, a few of our guys, some local forces, and a handful of British soldiers who kept to themselves. That's where it really begins. With the British guys nobody talked to. Now here's the thing, every base has cliques. Always. The pilots stick with pilots. The cooks stick with cooks. The intel people give you a look like you wouldn't understand even if they explained it. But these British guys were different. There were maybe 8 of them. Maybe 10. Honestly, I never got a clean count, and that SHOULD told me something right there. They came and went. Some days you'd see 4. Some days the whole place felt empty, and then at 3 in the morning you'd hear a vehicle, and in the morning there'd be more of them again, eating breakfast like they'd never left. They didn't wear normal rank. Their uniforms were a mix. Some of it wasn't even uniform, civilian boots, a fleece, a watch cap, beards on a couple of them. One older guy had gray in his. They looked, if I'm being real, kind of scruffy. The first time I saw them, I figured they were contractors, logistics, maybe drivers. I asked one of our guys, a corporal named Dawson, who are the Brits? And Dawson, and I'll never forget this, Dawson kind of glanced over at them, real quick, then looked back at me and said, "Lo, don't." "Don't what?" "Just don't leave 'em be." I laughed. "What are they going to bite?" He didn't laugh. He said, "Those are the quiet ones." And then he changed the subject. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured Dawson was being dramatic. Everybody's got a story about some secret squirrel unit. Half the time it's a guy who works in a tent and won't tell you what he does. It usually means nothing. But over the next week, I started watching the British guys without meaning to. You couldn't help it, they were just off, in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Here's what I mean. When most soldiers are bored, they get loud. We do. We yell across the yard, we rib each other, we talk trash, we laugh too hard, we make noise just to feel less far from home. It's normal, it's human. These guys made no noise. Not in a creepy way. They talked. They joked. I'd see one of them say something and another one would crack up. But it was quiet, contained. Like the whole conversation was happening at a volume meant for a room half the size. You could be 20 feet away and not hear a word, even though they were clearly having a great time. And they moved different. That's the part that stuck with me. You know how most of us walk? Heavy. We stomp. We carry our weight on our heels, especially in boots, especially tired. These guys walked like the floor owed them money and they were sneaking up on it. Light. even the big ones. There was a huge guy, and I mean huge, shoulders like a door frame, and he moved across that gravel yard like a cat. No sound. I remember staring at his feet trying to figure out how he did it. I never figured it out. One time I watched the gray-haired one cross the whole compound, from the chow tent to their building, and I swear to you, 3 guards who were supposed to be alert didn't clock him until he was right next to them. He wasn't sneaking. He was just walking. He was just naturally that quiet. That's when I started to think maybe Dawson wasn't being dramatic. I want to paint you the rest of the picture because the atmosphere matters. It's the whole thing, really. The base ran on a rhythm. Mornings were cold enough that you'd see your breath. By 10 it was hot. By noon it was brutal. The afternoon stretched out long and slow and miserable, everybody hiding from the sun, sweating in shade. Evenings cooled fast. And the nights, man, the nights out there. I'd never seen stars like that. No light for 100 miles. The whole sky just loaded with them, thick as spilled salt. On clear nights you could see the Milky Way like a smear of chalk across the black. I used to go out and look up at it when I couldn't sleep, which was a lot. And it was silent. That's the thing people don't tell you about places like that. The silence is enormous. Sometimes you'd hear a dog way off, or wind moving through the wire making this low hum, or once in a while far away, a sound you'd learn not to think too hard about. But mostly it was quiet, big, heavy, pressing quiet. It made the British guys fit somehow. They belonged to that quiet. The rest of us were always fighting it, filling it up with talk and music and engine noise. They lived inside it like it was home. The first time one of them actually spoke to me, I almost jumped. I was on a smoke break behind the generator shed, where you weren't really supposed to smoke, but everybody did. I had a cigarette I'd bummed off a sergeant from another platoon. It was dusk, that Purple Mountain hour. I was just standing there thinking about nothing. And a voice next to me said, "Spare one of those, mate." I about came out of my skin. I hadn't heard anyone approach, anyone, and I'd been standing in the open. It was one of the younger British guys. Lean, sandy hair, eyes that didn't really stop moving even while he was looking right at you. Friendly face, though, easy smile. I gave him a cigarette and my hands weren't quite steady, and he noticed and he grinned. "Sorry, didn't mean to give you a fright." "You move quiet," I said. "It came out kind of dumb." He shrugged, lighting up. "Habit." We stood there a minute, smoking, the mountains going dark. I asked him, because I couldn't help it, "What do you guys do, exactly?" He took a drag, looked out at the hills, and he said, real casual, like he was telling me the weather. "Bit of this, bit of that." That was it, that was the whole answer. Bit of this, bit of that. And somehow that told me more than a full briefing would have. His name, well, I'll call him Smudge. That's not his real name. That wasn't even his real nickname. But he was the only one who talked to me, and I don't want to put anything real out there. So Smudge. Over the next couple weeks, Smudge and I got friendly. Not friends exactly, but we'd nod, share a smoke, trade a few words. He was curious about American stuff, our chow, our gear, our movies. He thought it was the funniest thing in the world that we called the evening meal chow. "Chow," he'd say, shaking his head, grinning, "like you're calling a dog." I learned almost nothing about him. I learned he was from somewhere up north in England. I learned he had a kid. I learned he'd been in a fair while. And I learned that whenever I asked anything close to what they did or why they were there, he had about 6 different ways of saying nothing at all, and he used all of them, and he always smiled while he did it. The other guys I never got close to. The big one, I'll call him Tank, gave me a nod once, and that felt like winning the lottery. The gray-haired one, the older one, I never spoke to at all. He had this stillness to him. He'd sit in the corner of the chow tent with a brew just watching, and you got the feeling he was reading the whole room without trying. Like an old lion, not aggressive. Just aware, completely aware, of everything. Smudge called him the boss once, and then looked like he wished he hadn't. So that was the setup. That was the world. Small base, big silence, big sky, and a handful of quiet Brits that the rest of us slowly, quietly, started to be a little afraid of. Not afraid like they'd hurt us. Afraid like, you ever meet someone and your body just knows this is not a person to mess with before your brain even gets a vote. That kind. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything, because the not proving is the proof. I remember saying to Dawson after I'd watched them a few weeks, those guys, they're SAS, aren't they? Dawson didn't even look up from cleaning his rifle. He just said, I didn't say that, you didn't say that. Nobody said that. Which, was an answer. Now here's where it turns. It was maybe my 6th week on that base. Things had been quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the experienced guys nervous. Nothing's wrong, and that's exactly what's wrong. Then one afternoon, everything changed, and I didn't even notice it changing at first. It started with the British guys' building going dark, and I mean that literally. They had a building, a low concrete thing on the far side of the compound, sandbagged up, with a couple of antennas on it that nobody talked about. Usually you'd see the odd light, the odd bit of movement, people in and out. That afternoon all the doors shut, the shades came down, and these vehicles I'd never seen showed up, civilian-looking trucks, dust-colored, no markings. They drove straight to that building and parked tight against it, where you couldn't get a clean look. And the guys, the quiet ones, disappeared inside. The whole base felt it. Nobody said anything official, but you could read it in the air. The way the local interpreters got nervous. The way the intel people walked faster. The way an extra bird showed up that evening and got tucked under cover. Something was coming. Something was being built. I asked around, got nothing. That's how you know it's real, when even the rumor mill goes dry, somebody up top has shut it down hard. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. So I did what I did, went out to look at the stars. And I saw Smudge. He was standing by the wire alone, looking out at the Black Hills. No cigarette this time, just standing there, real still. Stiller than I'd ever seen him, and these were not exactly fidgety men. I walked over, didn't say anything at first, just stood next to him. After a while he spoke, without looking at me. You ever get the feeling, he said, right before, that bit of quiet, right before everything kicks off? I didn't know what to say, so I just said, yeah. He nodded slow, still looking at the hills. He said softly, that's where we are now. I'm going to tell you what I learned later, just so the rest of it makes sense. I didn't know any of this that night. I only pieced it together after from things I heard, things I wasn't supposed to hear. There was a compound, out in the hills a few hours' ride from us. A walled place, a few buildings in a little fold of ground near a dry riverbed. There were people being held there. I'll leave it at that, people who shouldn't have been there, who needed to come out, and who would not survive a loud, clumsy rescue. The bad guys holding them had made it very clear what would happen the second they heard helicopters or saw headlights. There was no margin. None. You couldn't blow the doors. You couldn't roll up in vehicles. You couldn't do it the way we'd have done it, fast, loud, overwhelming, doors caving in, everybody screaming. That works. I've seen it work. It's its own kind of beautiful in a brutal way. But it would have gotten everybody in that compound killed before we got through the first room. This needed something else, something I didn't have a word for yet. It needed the quiet ones. Here's the part where you find out how I ended up watching it at all, because I shouldn't have. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't meant to be there. I wasn't part of it. What happened was, a small element from our side got attached to the op. Not the main thing, the British guys were the main thing, all of it, the actual job. But somebody decided there should be an American piece for support. Outer cordon. Overwatch. The unglamorous ring around the outside, far back, in case it all went sideways and turned into a real fight and somebody needed to bring the noise after all. My fire team got picked. I still don't fully know why. Right place, right time, right reputation maybe, doesn't matter. We got the nod. The brief was short, painfully short. A guy I didn't know, with no patches I could read, stood in front of a map and told us almost nothing. Where we'd be, what we'd do, which was basically nothing unless told otherwise. And one line he said 3 times, 3 different ways, until it was burned into all of us. You do not move, you do not shoot, you do not make a sound unless we tell you to. This is not your show, you are the audience, understood. We understood. I didn't fully get, yet, just how much we were about to be only the audience. The British guys never came to that brief. They had their own. We never saw it. Smudge told me later, way later, almost nothing about it except one detail that stuck with me forever. He said their final brief, before they stepped off, took about 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I've sat through 40-minute briefs about how to clean a latrine. These men were about to walk into a building full of armed people guarding hostages, in the dark, with no margin for a single mistake, and they talked about it for 6 minutes. Because Smudge said they'd already talked about it their whole lives. They'd done it 1,000 times in their heads. They'd rehearsed pieces of it on a mock-up, somewhere, over and over, until it lived in their hands and feet instead of their heads. The brief wasn't where the work happened. The work had happened for years before that night. That's a thing I didn't understand then. I understand it now. The calm wasn't an act. The calm was earned. The night of we staged after dark. I remember the cold coming down hard and fast once the sun was gone. I remember the smell of the diesel and the dust and somebody's cold coffee. I remember my own breathing, too loud in my own ears, and trying to make it slow down. The British guys came out of their building in 1s and 2s, and they were transformed. Gone was the scruffy, joking, fleece-end watchcap look. They were kitted now, and it was the most squared-away, deliberate gear I'd ever seen, but even that was quiet. No clatter. Everything taped, everything stowed, nothing loose to rattle or shine. They'd done something to themselves where they didn't even look like the same men. The relaxed faces were gone. What was left was flat, calm, switched on in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. They didn't talk. They communicated in nods and tiny gestures. A hand, a look. The whole group moved like one animal with one mind. I caught Smudge's eye, just for a second as they loaded up. I don't know what I expected. A wink maybe, some bit of the easy grin. There was nothing. His eyes went over me like I was furniture, not unkind, just gone somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. And then they were on the birds, and the rotors came up, and they lifted off into all those stars, and I lost them in the black. We went out separate, by ground, the slow way, to take our place in the ring around the outside, far from the heart of it, with our one job, watch, wait, and pray we weren't needed. I had no idea, bumping along in the dark, that I was about to see the thing that changed how I understood my whole profession. I had no idea what quiet could really do. The ride out is its own kind of strange. You think the scary part is the target. It isn't. The scary part is the ride, the waiting with wheels under you part. You sit in the dark, jolting along, your gear digging into you, and your brain just runs. It runs through everything. Home, the job, the thing you forgot to say to somebody, the thing you said and shouldn't have. I sat with my rifle across my knees and my face turned to the little gap where you could see out, and I watched the country go by in shades of gray-green through my night vision. The hills, the dry washes, a wrecked truck somebody had stripped years ago, sitting there like a dead animal, a dog that watched us pass and didn't bark, which, in that part of the world, was somehow worse than if it had. Nobody talked. Our team didn't need telling twice. No sound unless told. We rode like ghosts. I kept thinking about Smudge's face right before they lifted off. That flat, gone somewhere else look. I couldn't shake it. I'd known the man for 6 weeks as a grinning chain smoker who thought my accent was hilarious. And then for 1 second, kidded up, He'd looked at me like I wasn't even there. I didn't understand it yet. I do now. You can't take the easy, joking version of yourself into a room like the one they were headed for. You have to put him down, somewhere safe. And you go in as the other thing, the flat thing, the thing that doesn't feel its own heartbeat. And if you're lucky, you get to pick the grinning version back up on the way home. Not everybody does. We dismounted way out, farther than I expected. That should have been my first lesson of the night, honestly. We dropped and went the last stretch on foot, slow, spread out, and we held up on a rise of high ground that looked down over the target from a good distance. A good distance. We were the outer ring, the far edge of the far edge. And I remember thinking, almost insulted if I'm honest, we're so far back we won't even see anything. I was wrong about that too, but not the way I thought. The thing about being that far out is you start to feel like furniture, like they parked you somewhere out of the way so you wouldn't break anything. And there's a part of you, a young, dumb, prideful part that wants to be useful, wants to be where it matters. I had to talk that part of myself down. Your job is to be quiet and watch. That's the job. Do the job. So I did. I got low on that cold ground, got my optics up, and I looked down at the compound for the first time. I'll tell you what it looked like, because it surprised me. I think when you hear hostage rescue, your head builds something dramatic, some fortress, floodlights, guard towers. It was a farm. That's all it was. From up there in the green wash of night vision, it was a walled farm in a fold of dead ground near a dry riverbed. A few low buildings inside the wall. A bigger one in the middle, flat-roofed, 2 stories, the kind of family compound you saw all over out there. A couple of smaller outbuildings. An animal pen. A tree, bare and crooked, throwing a long shadow under the moon. It looked like nothing. It looked like a place where people kept goats. And I remember the cold feeling that came over me when I realized that's the point. That's exactly why it works as a place to hide people, because it looks like nothing. Because it looks like a place where people keep goats. There were guards. Once you knew to look, you could pick them out. 2 on the wall, more or less. One who walked the inside of the courtyard now and then, slow, bored, a rifle slung. A light on in the big building, low and yellow, in one upstairs window. Somebody was awake in there. And somewhere inside those walls, in the dark, were people waiting to find out if they'd live. I lay there and I looked at it, and the size of the thing finally landed on me. The realness of it. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a mock-up with role players. There were human beings down there who were going to die or not die in the next little while, and the deciding of it was already in motion, somewhere out in that black, riding in on the quiet ones. My mouth went dry. I made myself breathe slow. Now I have to tell you about the wait. Because the wait is where the first impossible thing happened, and you need to feel how long it was to understand it. We held on that rise for a long time. Hours it felt like, probably less than it felt. Time goes wrong on a job like that. It stretches and pools. And nothing happened, nothing. The compound just sat there. The guards walked their little board patterns. The light in the upstairs window stayed on. The crooked tree threw its shadow. Off in the hills a dog barked once, far away, and quit. I kept waiting for the helicopters. That's what I knew. That's what I'd seen, what I'd trained for. The whole shock and awe of it. Birds coming in fast and low, the noise hitting first, then ropes, then men, doors going in, the world turning to violence in a heartbeat. Loud, total, overwhelming. That's how my world did it, and my world is very, very good at it. I waited for that. It never came. No helicopters, no engines, no headlights swinging up the road, no go. Not even the feeling of a go, that crackle in the air before something kicks off. Nothing. And the longer nothing happened, the more I started to think, with this sinking feeling, did it get scrubbed? Did something go wrong? Are we just going to lie here all night and ride home? I keyed up the nerve to glance at my team leader. He had his optics up, dead still, watching. I couldn't read anything off him. So I went back to watching too. And that's when I noticed the first guard was gone. I want to be really precise about this, because it's the part that still gives me a chill. There'd been a guard on the near wall. I'd been half-tracking him for, I don't know, an hour. He'd shift his weight, scratch his neck. Once he'd leaned his rifle against the wall to do something with his hands, then picked it back up. He was a real person. I'd been watching him be a real, bored, cold, tired person for an hour. And then he wasn't there. I blinked, looked again, swept the whole length of the wall. Gone. No sound, no movement, no struggle. No shape dropping, no scuffle, nothing. One sweep he's there, next sweep he's not, like he'd been erased. I felt my stomach do something cold. I told myself he sat down. He stepped behind something. He went for a piss. People move, don't be dramatic. Then the second guard went. Same thing. The one who walked the courtyard, the slow, bored one. I had eyes near him and then I didn't. He didn't fall. He didn't cry out. He didn't run. He just wasn't anymore. The space where he'd been was just empty courtyard and moon shadow. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck under my helmet, and I understood, in a rush that made me almost dizzy. It already started. It had already started, and I lying there with my optics up, doing literally nothing but watch, with one job, which was to watch. I hadn't seen it begin. Let me make sure you really get this. I'm a trained infantryman. I was looking at the target. I had good optics. There were maybe 8 men down there in that compound doing the most violent, most dangerous work there is, and they were already in among the enemy, and I, the audience, the guy whose entire job was to see, had not seen one single second of their approach. Not a man crossing open ground, not a shape going over the wall, not a flicker by the riverbed, not a sound, not a hint. They had crossed God knows how much open country, in the dark, in the wide quiet, gotten right up to the wall, gotten over it, gotten inside and started taking the place apart, and from my seat in the front row I had seen exactly nothing. I'd been waiting for helicopters. They came on foot, like the night itself had decided to walk. I have to be honest about what was going through my head, because it matters to the whole point of this story. My first feeling wasn't admiration. I'd love to tell you it was. It wasn't. My first feeling was a kind of embarrassment, almost anger. How did I not see that? What's wrong with me? I'm good at this. I'm supposed to be good at this. My pride took a hit before my brain caught up. Because up to that night in my heart I thought elite meant what my world meant by it. It meant hard. It meant fast. It meant tough as nails and twice as loud. It meant being able to bring more violence, more committed, more total than the other guy. And by that measure, my people are about as elite as it gets on this earth. I still believe that. I'll believe it till I die. But lying on that cold rise, watching armed men evaporate off a wall in total silence, I felt the first crack run through that idea. Because what I was watching wasn't more, it was less. Less noise, less drama, less everything. And somehow it was more frightening than any breach I'd ever seen. These men weren't trying to overwhelm that compound. They were trying to make it so the compound never knew they'd come. I nudged my optics back to the upstairs window, the yellow light. Still on. That's the thing that really got me. 2 guards gone, vanished, and that light was still on. Somebody was still up there, awake, completely unaware that the night had already swallowed the men who were supposed to be protecting them, sitting in their little pool of yellow light thinking it was a night like any other. I thought about that for years afterward, that window, the not knowing. There's a kind of power in that, a terrible, quiet kind. The power to be already there and have nobody know it yet. To have already decided how the next 60 seconds are going to go for everyone in the building, while they sit there thinking nothing's wrong. We, my world, we announce ourselves, on purpose. The noise is the weapon. The shock is the weapon, and it works. These men had thrown all of that away, and replaced it with this, with silence so complete it was its own kind of overwhelming force. I didn't have the words for it that night. I just lay there with my heart going and the cold ground under me and the stars enormous overhead, and I felt small, in a way that didn't hurt exactly. The way you feel small looking at the ocean. The way you feel small looking at those stars. You feel small, and you don't even mind, because what you're looking at is so much bigger than you. Then a voice came up, soft in my ear. Not ours, not American. A clipped British voice, flat and calm, just 2 words, and I'll never forget how bored it sounded. How completely, impossibly calm. It said, "Hold position." That was it. Somewhere down there, inside the wall, in the dark, in the middle of it, one of those men had keyed up to tell us, the outer ring, the audience, to keep doing nothing. And he'd done it in the tone of a man asking you to pass the salt. I'd been holding my breath. I let it out slow, shaking a little. And then I looked back down at the compound and got ready, because I knew in my gut that the next part was going to be the part. The light in the window, the people in the building, the hostages in the dark. The quiet ones were inside now. And in a minute, the quiet was going to do the only loud thing it would do all night. There's a thing that happens to your eyes when you've been staring at one spot too long. It starts to lie to you. Shadows breathe. Shapes drift. You blink and rub your eye and look again and tell yourself to trust the optics, not the brain behind them. So when I first saw the movement in the courtyard, I didn't trust it. It was just a piece of the dark sliding, low along the inside of the wall where the moon shadow pooled thickest. If you weren't looking dead at it, you'd never catch it. And even looking dead at it, I caught myself thinking that's nothing, that's your eyes, that's a goat. Then the piece of dark stopped at the corner of the big building and held, and a second piece of dark caught up to it and stacked behind it, and a third, and I realized I was looking at men. I was looking at the quiet ones, moving across open ground inside the enemy's own walls, and they were so smooth, so low, so unhurried about it, that my own trained eyes kept trying to tell me they weren't there. I want you to sit with that. They weren't sprinting. They weren't diving for cover. There was no urgency in it that you could see. It looked, and I know how this sounds, it looked patient. Like men who had all the time in the world, inside a place where one wrong second meant somebody died. That was the second crack in everything I thought I knew. The first was I never saw them arrive. The second was they aren't rushing. In my world, speed is life. Speed is the whole religion. And here were these men moving slow as syrup, and it was scarier than any sprint I'd ever seen. Because the slowness wasn't hesitation. The slowness was control, total, absolute control, of themselves, of the tempo, of the whole night. I keyed my eyes up to the window again, the yellow light still on. And I had this awful, fascinated feeling, like watching 2 trains, one that knows and one that doesn't. There was a person up there in that little yellow room, awake, alive, completely unaware, and there were men sliding through the dark below them who had already decided that room's future. The person in the light didn't know the night had a verdict yet. The men in the dark already had it written. I couldn't look away. The dark shapes reached the base of the building. I lost them against it. They melted into the wall the way they'd melted into everything else. For a long moment there was nothing. Just the building, the light, the crooked tree, the enormous spill of stars. And the quiet, that huge, pressing, countryside quiet. I realized I was holding my breath again. I made myself stop. My pulse was loud in my own ears, and I had a stupid thought they'd hear my heartbeat. From here, these men would hear it. Now I didn't see the entry itself. I want to be straight with you about that, because half the bad versions of stories like this fall apart on exactly this point. Somebody claims they saw everything in perfect detail from a mile off in the dark. I didn't. They went in on the far side, around the corner of the building, out of my line. I saw them reach the wall, and then I saw nothing of the door. But I'll tell you what I did see, and what I learned later, and how the two fit together. Because both of those matter. What I saw was this: the yellow light went out. That's it, that's the whole signal I got. 1 second there's a warm square of light in an upstairs window, and the next second there isn't. Gone, like somebody pinched a candle. No flash, no bang, no crack of a breach, no shouting, no long burst of fire. A light went out. That's how I knew they were in. I've thought about that more than almost anything else from that night. In my world, you know the entry happened. The whole valley knows. There's a bang you feel in your chest from a quarter mile off. There's that unmistakable signature, the breach, the noise, the world tearing open. It's how it's supposed to be. The noise is part of the weapon. These men entered a building full of armed enemies holding hostages, and the only thing that changed in the world I could see was that one small light went off. Here's the part I learned later, from Smudge, months down the line in pieces, over more than one cigarette and never all at once. I won't pretend I got a full account. I didn't. These aren't men who give full accounts, but I got enough to understand the shape of it, and the shape of it is the whole lesson of this story, so I'll give you what I got. He said the hardest part of a job like that isn't the violence. He said the violence, when it comes, is over in a snap. It has to be. That's the entire point. He said the hard part is everything before the violence, the getting there, the patience, the reading of the place. He said by the time they went through that door, they already knew near enough where everyone in the building was, who was awake, who wasn't, which room held what, where the hostages were and where they weren't. I asked him how. I asked him that more than once, actually, different ways, the way I always tried to sneak it out of him. And he just looked at me with that easy grin coming back into his face, the grinning Smudge, the safe version Smudge, and said, "Patience, mate. You'd be amazed what people show you when they don't know you're watching." That was the whole answer. You'd be amazed what people show you when they don't know you're watching. I've turned that sentence over 1,000 times. He told me one other thing about the entry that I'll never forget, and it's the thing that finally broke my old idea of elite clean in half. He said the goal, the whole goal, was that the people who needed to be dealt with would be dealt with, and the people who didn't wouldn't even wake up. Read that again. The people who didn't wouldn't even wake up. In a building full of danger in the dark, surrounded, outnumbered, with their own lives on the line every second, these men's measure of a job well done wasn't how much. It was how little, how few, how precise. How much of the building could be left untouched, undisturbed, asleep, while they removed exactly and only the threat and lifted out exactly and only the people they'd come for. That's a kind of discipline I had genuinely never imagined. My whole training pointed the other way. When you go through a door, you dominate. Every room, total, overwhelming. And that's correct for what my world does. I'm not knocking it. It saves lives. It saved mine. But this was a different art entirely. This was a scalpel where I'd only ever known the hammer, and I'd never even understood until that night that the scalpel existed. I'd thought harder hammer was the top of the mountain. I didn't know there was a whole other mountain. Back to the rise, back to that night, the real time of it. After the light went out, there was the worst part. The waiting. Again. But a different flavor of waiting, the kind where you know something's happening, right now in there in the dark, and you can't see it and can't help and can't do anything but lie still and let it happen. I strained to hear. I genuinely strained, like leaning your whole body toward a sound. And here's the thing that I still can hardly believe. I heard almost nothing. I want to be careful and honest. I won't tell you it was perfectly, magically silent, that there was nothing at all. There was something, maybe, a sound so faint and so short I'm still not 100% sure I didn't imagine it. A flat little cough of a sound, once, maybe twice, swallowed instantly by all that country-sized quiet. The kind of sound you'd never notice if you weren't lying in the dark with every nerve stretched out listening for it. That was it. That was the entire audible signature of armed men clearing a building full of enemies. A light going out, And maybe, a sound like a book dropped on a carpet in another room. I lay there with my mouth open. I'm not exaggerating. My mouth was actually open. You have to understand the contrast, because the contrast is the whole feeling. I'd been on the other end of entries, I'd been in them. I knew in my body what that work sounds like in my world. It's enormous. It's the loudest thing you'll ever stand next to. It's bang and shout and boots and the world coming apart, and it's supposed to be that storm of noise, and speed is the weapon. It freezes the enemy. It buys you the half second that keeps you alive. I'm not mocking it. I'd do it again tomorrow. It works. But I'd never once imagined the opposite could work. That you could do the same job, the same deadly, no-margin job, and do it so quietly that a guy lying right there, watching for it, waiting for it, trained for it, would catch only a light going off and one soft cough of sound. It rearranged something in me. Right there on the cold ground, I felt it move. Up to that night, if you'd asked me what the most elite soldiers on Earth looked like in action, I'd have described a storm. Speed and thunder and overwhelming force. The loudest, hardest, fastest version of war. And now, lying there, I was watching the most elite thing I'd ever see in my life, and it looked like nothing at all. It looked like silence. It looked like a quiet house at night with the lights going off one by one. That's when I really got it. Not in my head, I'd half gotten it in my head already. I got it in my chest. Elite isn't one thing, there isn't one mountain. My people had climbed all the way to the top of one mountain, the mountain of force, and we were genuinely as good at it as anyone alive. And these men had climbed all the way to the top of a completely different mountain, one I hadn't even known was there, the mountain of stillness, patience, precision, and silence. Two summits, both impossibly high. And from the top of either one, you can't even see the other. The British voice came up in my ear again. Same flat calm, same bored-sounding tone, like a man reading a shopping list. This time it said something a little different. It said, "Stand by." And something in the way he said it, even that flat, even that calm, put a charge through all of us. Stand by. 2 words. But it meant we were close to the hinge of the whole night now. The part where it either holds together or comes apart. The part where the hostages either walk out of that building or they don't. I tightened my grip on my rifle, pressed myself a little flatter to the cold ground, slowed my breathing the way you do when you need your hands to be steady. Down in the dark, behind that wall, in that quiet house with the lights going off, the men I'd thought were scruffy contractors 6 weeks ago were somewhere in the middle of the most dangerous minute of the night, moving room to room, deciding who slept and who didn't, looking for the people they'd flown all this way and walked all that black country to carry home. And I lay on a rise 40 meters and a whole world away, an American Marine who'd thought he understood what hard men looked like, and I waited to see how it ended. Stand by. Those 2 words sat in my ear, and I swear the whole night leaned forward. I don't know how long it actually was. Long enough that my arms started to ache from holding the optics. Long enough that the cold had gotten all the way into me, into the bone, that deep desert night cold that doesn't feel like cold anymore so much as just absence. Long enough that I had time to think about every bad thing that could be happening behind that wall. And then the door opened. The real door, the courtyard door in the wall. It opened slow. Not kicked, not blown open from the inside by a hand the way you'd open a door in your own house. And out of it came the shapes again, low and smooth, except now they were different. Now they were carrying. That's the image that's burned into me, not the violence. I never really saw the violence. The carry. Those low, dark shapes coming out of that wall with people held up between them. The hostages. You picture it one way in your head. You picture people running, sprinting for freedom, like in a film. It wasn't like that. They couldn't run. Whatever they'd been through in there, and I'll let your imagination fill that because mine did and I wish it hadn't, they couldn't move on their own, not really. They came out folded over, half carried, draped between the men, feet barely finding the ground. and the quiet ones moved them like they were made of glass. That's the thing I wasn't ready for. These were the same men who, minutes before, had been doing the hardest, most violent work there is, in the dark, room by room. And now those same hands were gentle. You could see it even from 40 meters in the green of the night vision. The care of it. The way they steadied a head. The way one of them shrugged a whole person up onto his back and adjusted them, careful, like you'd adjust a sleeping kid you didn't want to wake. I think that's the moment something in my throat went tight and stayed tight. Because that's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the whole impossible thing about that kind of soldier. The same person has to be both. Has to be the flat, gone somewhere else thing that goes through the door and the gentle thing that carries the survivor out cradled like glass. Both. In the same minute. In the same set of hands. I'd thought elite meant being very, very good at one thing. I was watching men be very, very good at two things that should cancel each other out, and somehow they held both at once, and the holding both was the most human thing I'd ever seen on a battlefield. They came across the courtyard in that same low, patient flow, out the gate, into the open ground beyond the wall, toward the dead riverbed, toward the dark. And for a few seconds it was actually working. It was actually going to be clean. 2 guards gone like smoke, a light going off, a soft cough of sound, and now the people walking out cradled in those careful arms, and nobody in that building any the wiser, and I thought, that's it, they did it. They did the whole thing, and the house never even woke up. And then the house woke up. I don't know what tipped it, I never found out. Maybe somebody upstairs finally noticed the quiet had gone wrong. Maybe a sleeper stirred at the worst possible second. Maybe just luck, the bad kind, the kind that's always waiting. But a light came on, a different window, and then a voice, a real voice, shouting, ragged, panicked, in a language I didn't have cut across that whole enormous quiet like a knife through cloth. And the night, which had been holding its breath this whole time, finally let it out. There was a shape at an upper window. I saw it and my whole body went electric. That's a weapon. That's a muzzle. That's a man bringing a weapon up, and every cell in me screamed to do the thing I was trained to do, to fire, to protect, to act. And I didn't move. I want you to know I didn't move. The brief sat in my head like a stone. You do not shoot unless we tell you. My team didn't move either. Not one of us. We lay there with our hearts trying to come up through our throats, and we trusted. We trusted these men to handle their own night. It's one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life, lying still while a threat appears. Everything you are built to do, screaming, and you swallow it, because the men on the ground are better at this than you, and the worst thing you could do is make noise. Here is the part I will never, ever forget, the center of the whole story, the thing I came here to tell you. When the house woke up, when the shouting started, when the light came on, when that shape filled the window, the men carrying the hostages did not panic. They didn't break stride. They didn't drop the people they were carrying to free up their hands. They didn't scatter. Some of them, the ones with the survivors on their backs, kept walking, steady, toward the riverbed, toward safety, like the shouting wasn't even happening, like a wasp had buzzed past. The most important thing in the world was the person draped over their shoulders, and that did not change just because the night had turned, and so they carried, and they did not stop carrying. And the others, the ones with free hands, peeled off, turned, faced the house, put themselves between the threat and the carry, between the danger and the people. It happened in less than a second, and there was no signal I could see. No shout, no order, no hand wave. They just knew. Every man knew which half of that moment was his, carry or cover, and they split into it clean as a coin landing, and the whole thing flowed like water finding its level. That's what 20 years of being on the same team does. That's what all those years before the 6-minute brief buy you. You don't need to say it. You've already said it 10,000 times. The decision lives in the body now. I saw it and I understood, finally and completely, what I'd been looking at all night. I wasn't watching 8 individual hard men. I was watching one organism, One mind in 8 bodies. And under the worst possible pressure, the moment it could ve all come apart, it didn't even bend. The shape in the window, I'll tell you what happened. And I'll tell you honestly that it happened so fast and so quiet I almost missed it. There was no long firefight, no storm of tracer, no drama. In my world, there'd have been a wall of fire put on that window, a whole team unloading, the right and proper answer, total and overwhelming. I'd have done it myself without a thought. Here there was, I want to get this right, a couple of small, flat, controlled sounds. That same swallowed cough I'd half heard before, twice more fast. The window threat just stopped. The shape dropped back out of the light and the threat from it was simply over. No more than was needed. Not one bit more. Even now, even under fire, even with the night gone loud and bad, they spent only exactly what the moment cost and not a cent over. And then they were moving again. The cover element folding back in around the carry, the whole organism flowing toward the riverbed and the dark, and the panicked house behind them already too late, always too late, because the people they'd come for were already out, already gone, already being carried home. The voice came up in my ear one more time during all this, and I think about this more than almost anything. The house was awake, shouting. A man had just been in a window with a weapon. The whole job had just nearly tipped over the edge into a real and terrible fight. And the voice in my ear was exactly as calm as it had been all night. Same flat tone, same bored shopping list delivery, not 1 degree of stress in it. It said, simple as anything. Coming out hold. That was all, coming out hold. A man whose night had just gone sideways, who was at that moment moving wounded people across open ground under fire, told the American outer cordon to keep doing nothing. And he did it in the tone of a man telling you his bus was a bit late. I have been calm under pressure in my life. I've trained hard for it. I'm proud of it. I have never ever been that calm. I'm not sure I believe a human being can learn to be that calm. But I heard it. With my own ears, in my own earpiece, I heard it. That voice did more to teach me what elite means than anything I saw all night. Because the silence, the patience, the carry, the split-second cover, all of that was in their hands and feet. But the calm was in their souls. And you can't tape that down or stow it quiet. You either have it or you don't, and they had it all the way to the bottom. I lay on that cold rise and watched the dark shapes melt into the riverbed with the people they'd come for held safe against them, and the awake house screaming uselessly behind them into a night that had already taken everything it came for. And I felt my eyes sting, and I told myself it was the cold and the dust, and it wasn't. I had thought 6 weeks before that I knew what the toughest men on earth looked like. I was right, actually. I did know what some of them looked like. I'd served beside them. I'd been among them. My people are as hard as anyone who's ever walked, and I'll fight anybody who says different. But that night I learned there was another kind, a quieter kind, a kind whose whole art was to make the most violent work in the world look like a house at night with the lights going off one by one. And then, when it nearly came apart, to carry the wounded out gentle as glass, splitting cover from carry without a word, in a voice as calm as a man waiting for a bus. And from the top of my mountain, I'd never even seen theirs. We held that rise a while longer after the shapes disappeared into the riverbed. I don't know how long. The voice in my ear said hold, so we held. The house behind the wall kept shouting into the dark for a bit, and then even that died down, the way panic does when there's nothing left to panic at. The light in that one window stayed on. The crooked tree threw its long shadow. The stars kept on being enormous. Eventually the word came to move. Quiet, same flat British calm. We peeled back off the high ground the way we'd come, slow and spread out, and got to the vehicles, and started the long ride back through all that gray-green country. And here's the part nobody tells you about, the part you only learn by living it. After something like that, you don't feel triumphant. You don't feel like a movie. You feel empty, hollowed out. Your body's been running on something for hours and now there's nothing left in the tank and you just sit there in the dark with the wheels under you and you don't say a word. Nobody on my team spoke the whole ride. Not one of us. We'd been the audience. We'd done nothing, fired nothing, touched nothing. And we rode home wrung out like rags anyway, because watching it had cost us something too, though a much, much smaller something than it cost the men who'd actually walked into that house. I looked out the gap at the country going by and I kept seeing it, the light going out, the shapes coming across the courtyard with people held up between them, the carry, gentle as glass. The hostages lived. I'll tell you that much, because I know you've been wondering and because it's the only part of the ending that really matters. They got out. They got home. To people who'd been waiting and praying and not sleeping, the way you don't sleep when someone you love is somewhere out in the dark in someone else's hands. Whatever those people went through in that compound, they went home. And they got to have the rest of their lives, all the boring, ordinary days of them, the days you only understand are precious once somebody nearly takes them away. 8 quiet men walked across a country in the dark so that some strangers could have their ordinary days back. And then they handed the people over and stepped back, and as far as I ever knew, never told a soul. Not for a medal, not for a parade, not for a story told at a bar. They just did it, the best in the world at it. And then they melted back into being scruffy guys in fleeces who thought my accent was funny. I think about that part more than the raid, honestly, the stepping back, the not needing anyone to know. I saw Smudge a few days later, behind the generator shed, same spot, same dusk. He was leaning against the wall with a cigarette already going, and when he saw me he grinned, the easy grin, the safe version Smudge, fully back now, like the flat gone somewhere else man I'd watched load onto the bird had never existed. He held out the pack. I took one. My hands were steadier than the night we'd met, a little. We stood there a while, didn't say anything. The mountains went purple and then black. I wanted to ask him 100 things, about the light going out, about the cough of sound, about the carry, about the calm in his mate's voice when the whole night nearly tipped over, about how a man does the most violent work there is and then cradles a stranger gentle as glass in the same minute with the same hands. In the end, I only managed one thing. I said kind of quiet, I watched the whole thing from the rise. He nodded slow, took a drag, didn't ask what I thought of it. So I told him anyway. I said, I've never seen anything like that in my life, and I never saw you come in. I was looking right at it. One job, I never saw you arrive. And he smiled around the cigarette, looking out at the dark hills, and he said, and this is the thing I've carried ever since, the thing I tell people when they ask me what it taught me. That's the whole job, mate. If you saw us, we'd have done it wrong. If you saw us, we'd have done it wrong. Think about that. Sit with it the way I've had to. My entire profession is built on being seen, on presence, on overwhelming, undeniable, world-ending force that the enemy sees and feels and never forgets. That's our art. That's our mountain. We are the storm, and the storm is supposed to be witnessed. And we are as good at being the storm as anyone who has ever lived. I will say that till the day I die. And here was a man telling me that his art, the highest, hardest version of his art, was to never be seen at all. That the perfect night for him was a night where nobody ever knew he'd been there, where the only proof he'd come was a light going off and some people who got to go home and an empty space on a wall where a guard used to be. Success for my world looks like thunder. Success for his looks like silence. And both of those mountains are so high you can't see the top of one from the top of the other. I'd spent my whole career climbing mine, proud of every meter, and I genuinely believed I was looking at the whole sky. That night I learned there was another peak out there in the dark the entire time, just as tall, climbed by men just as committed, and I'd never even known it was there. That's a humbling thing to learn, the good kind of humbling, the kind that doesn't make you smaller, it makes the world bigger. I rotated out not long after. Never saw Smudge again. Never saw any of them again. I don't know if he's still alive. I hope he is. I hope he's home with that kid, grown now, somewhere up north in England, being a scruffy guy in a fleece who tells terrible jokes and never, ever talks about the nights he spent walking across the dark so strangers could keep their ordinary days. I don't know his real name. I never did. I wouldn't say it if I knew it. That's how he'd want it. If you saw us, we'd have done it wrong. So this is the only monument I can give him. A story told 4 or 5 times in my whole life, to people who half don't believe it, about a night I lay on a cold rise and watched the quiet ones do the impossible and never make a sound. People ask me sometimes, usually the ones who half believe it, so who's better, your guys or theirs? And I always tell them the same thing. It's the wrong question. It was always the wrong question. It's like asking whether the ocean is better than the sky. My people are the storm. When the world needs thunder, when it needs force that cannot be denied, brought harder and faster than anyone alive can bring it, there is nobody on this earth I'd rather have than the people I served with. I'd put them up against anyone. I mean that with my whole chest. And the quiet ones are the silence. When the world needs a thing done so carefully that nobody can even know it was done, when there's no margin, no second chance, and a single sound means somebody dies, then you need men who have climbed that other mountain. The mountain of patience and stillness and a calm that goes all the way to the soul. 2 summits, both impossibly high, both worth a life to climb. I just happened to spend one cold night with a front row seat to the one I never knew existed, and I've never looked at the word elite the same way since. So that's it. That's the whole thing, the light going out, the carry, the calm voice telling me to hold while his own night came apart, the scruffy guy behind the generator shed telling me the whole job was to never be seen. I'll leave you with the thing I think about on the quiet nights, when I'm home and safe, and looking up at stars that are nowhere near as bright as they were out there. The loudest thing I ever learned about courage, I learned from the quietest men I ever met. And not one of them ever raised their voice.